So thanks to everybody for sticking around. I was really happy that I got to catch the last half of that beautiful panel on supported decision making. And I think this can very much be a continuation of that conversation. In fact, the match that I'm going to report out to you about, we had an explicit sort of complementarity with the match focused on supported decision making, with Erica Butters from New Zealand sort of participating in both planning groups. And as you'll see, we believe and contend that supported decision making is one essential element of self-direction, which I will be sharing out about this afternoon. So hello to everyone. My name is Bevin Croft. I direct the behavioral health team at the Human Services Research Institute. My colleague Val Bradley is here, and my colleague Nicole LeBlanc are here, who are both at HSRI as well. I've been asked to report back on the virtual match focused on self-direction. So I'm going to tell you a story of three matches, actually, because this was the third learning exchange focused on self-direction that we have been a part of. And then I'm going to share with you the product of our most recent match, and really the product of three matches will be my argument, and actually would love to use this opportunity to sort of crowdsource and get your reactions to the product of that match, which is an international statement on self-direction, which sounds very grandiose, but that's what it is. I'm assuming that everyone here has some familiarity with self-direction, but the first three letters of assume suggest that I shouldn't necessarily do that. So are any folks in the room self-directing or have a loved one who self-directs their services? Anyone? Okay. And then raise your hand if you feel like you totally understand what self-direction is. I say I'm going to talk about self-direction. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so not everyone is raising their hand. All right, so I'm actually going to give you what I think is a pretty robust definition of self-direction later on, but basically what we're talking about here is fundamentally structuring supports for a person in ways that maximize choice and control, and we will argue human rights as well. And so in the U.S., that often looks like if you receive home and community-based services funded by Medicaid, then you sort of control the purse strings for those services, and you can hire and fire your support staff. You can, in some cases, use funding to purchase goods and services that support you to live the life that you want to live. And there are different forms of this idea all around the world. And a bunch of people really care a lot about it, including me. And I'm going to tell you about some priorities and sort of thorny issues that we've been hashing over since 2015. So in 2015, the Human Services Research Institute and what was then called the National Resource Center for Participant-Directed Services at Boston College hosted a learning exchange focused on self-direction, specifically self-direction for people with mental health-related concerns, which is my personal sort of research passion and what I have built my career, my body of research on, is building an evidence base for that. But really, the folks who attended that exchange, which was 40 people from 7 countries, identified some key priorities for self-direction sort of over 2 days of intensive discussions. One is that fundamentally at heart, when we're talking about self-direction, we're talking about something that's radical, something that shifts power and control and choices and resources from often providers to people.
And that's fundamentally what it is, and we can't lose sight of that. A second priority is nothing about us without us. The principles of disability justice must be at the heart of self-direction. And that means that when we're talking about best practice for self-direction, when we're talking about research on self-direction, when we're talking about the sort of people who administer and develop policies for self-direction, that people with lived experience should be, not even at the table, defining the table, right? Being, setting the stage. I will be honest and tell you that I don't believe that happens now. If you look at how, self-direction models and practices have been developed, the policies that have been written, they have not been written by disabled people. They've been written by administrators, right? And so that's a fault, and that's something that we have been talking about since 2015 and continue to talk about. By the way, I do not identify as a person with a disability. I do identify as an ally, and disabled people were part of the leadership team for this match and for all of the matches. Third priority is that stakeholder communication is critical. And so, and I learned this from Boston College, I think and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the work that they've done on self-direction. It is essential that when we're doing wonderful things, and the supported decision-making work, same thing, right? These amazing stories matter and must be at the forefront of communication, must be at the forefront, put in front of policymakers alongside, quantitative data that tells us that this doesn't cost any more than traditional arrangements or doesn't result in, whatever kinds of bad outcomes and does result in good outcomes. All those sorts of things, very important. Data research, very important. Also stories and narratives are data and are so key. Okay, so those are the first, that was 2015. All of those things remain true. 2019 in Boston, Applied Self-Direction and the Human Services Research Institute hosted another match to discuss and bring forward advancing self-direction across different countries. What did we talk about there? We talked about equity in outreach. We talked about the fact that self-direction is complicated. And when you have a complicated, innovative practice that has sort of administrative rules and requirements, that without the support to sort of translate that work into so that it's easily accessible for all, we run into serious equity concerns. And that can look like families with more resources, people with, the wherewithal, the time, the education, the language to sort of navigate really complex policies and advocate for themselves or for their kid are the ones that access this innovative service. And families that don't have those things don't even know that it exists. And we don't have a lot of data on that in the United States, but we suspect that is the case, and it's incredibly important to look at. So that was highlighted as equity and outreach. How do we make self-direction something that's available to all, and especially to groups that have been historically marginalized, underrepresented, and disenfranchised in our countries? A second theme was person-centered planning. Full disclosure, in addition to the self-direction work, I co-direct a National Technical Assistance Center on person-centered planning, but really thinking about best practice in person-centered planning as a cornerstone for self-direction. Not first the budget, not first the money, but first are we really discovering what a person's good life is, and is that driving all decisions moving forward? We continued to talk about lived experience, self-advocacy, and peer support. And peer support being another essential best practice, which made it into our statement, and you'll see later. We never don't talk about the adequacy or inadequacy of the workforce. And in the case of self-direction, that becomes particularly interesting because when self-direction enables folks to hire family caregivers, to hire a neighbor, it means expanding the workforce. And there are, real benefits to that, and also some areas where that gets very complex. And finally, we talked about data and the importance of using data, having data, to demonstrate that self-direction works and that it matters and that outcomes matter. Okay. So the other big takeaway from the first two exchanges, 4 days of gathering and meeting with some really smart and passionate people, was that we don't actually have any standards. We don't actually have any agreed upon definition that helps us to get our arms around what is self-direction, what should self-direction look like, what is best practice when it comes to self-direction. Here in the United States, if you've seen one self-direction program, you've seen one self-direction program. They vary so widely. It can be very, very difficult. So we took a big gulp and we decided that for this exchange, we needed to bring together folks and see if we could come up with something and see if we could gain consensus on something. The structure of this exchange was maybe a little different than some of the other exchanges. It first formed, a planning group formed back when we thought we'd get together in New Zealand together, and wouldn't that have been so amazing? And it was a group of some of us at the Human Services Research Institute, as well as two organizations in New Zealand that are at the forefront of self-directed supports there, Manawanui and Manavakaha, along with disabled community activists who brought some really key perspectives. And we met roughly every 2 weeks for about 18 months to really think through, what this could look like, and just, kind of really hash out, what would need to go into gathering people together to develop a statement of some form, and what we would do with that statement in the future. We had representation on that planning group from Eric Butters, who is with PASAT, and now I'm afraid I cannot remember. Does anyone have the acronym? It's a New Zealand organization that supports supported decision making. I should have written it down. And we had 30 folks representing New Zealand, Australia, the US, Canada, Ireland, Finland, and England, and we sort of tapped into the Self-Directed Supports Network, which is a network of European folks in Europe who are and have been sort of collaborating to advance self-direction in Europe. And we tapped into that network and sort of developed some relationships that will continue with that group. So in terms of the process for developing standards, the planning group, prior to the match convening, did sort of a big scan and gathered up lots and lots of documents. There have been some self-determination convenings that have happened in the past. There's the Seattle statement that was done in, I think, 2000. More recently, Lynn Breedlove produced, I think, a pretty remarkable paper on what constitutes a good self-direction program. We at the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems are midway through a learning collaborative on self-direction, which includes a sort of change package of sort of key elements of self-direction that Val Bradley helped us to develop, and Val, of course, and colleagues Kevin Mahoney and Mark Fenton recently edited a book on self-direction. So some pretty great thinking and work was kind of gathered up together. I will say I don't believe that there's a single original thought in this statement that I'm going to share with you, but it's the first time I think that it's all together in one spot that's been put together in this way, and it fits on one page. That's the important thing. Okay, so we reviewed the documents. We then gathered together that full group of folks, meeting virtually is awesome and supports accessibility. Meeting virtually with people from Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and North America is pretty much impossible unless somebody's willing to get up at 3 in the morning. So in all candor, it was pretty difficult to have everyone together at every meeting, but we had one full group meeting, and then we had a second convening where we had 3 concurrent meetings in like reasonable time zones, that were recorded, and then we viewed the recordings, and then we had a third full group meeting. And in all of those meetings, or in the initial meetings, the first 2, or the first full group and then the regional meetings, we just sort of had some big picture conversations about the orientation of a statement, what should it look like, what types of language are important, what types of framing do we want to have. Then 2 of us, myself and Simon Duffy, who's in England, sort of took a crack at co-authoring something, putting some words onto paper. That statement was then reviewed kind of asynchronously with the group, with people, making comments, and then discussed during a final match convening. And we landed on what I have here. So that's how we put this together. And it fits on one page, it fits on 4 slides. So I thought I would just share it with you, and get your reactions. So here's the draft global standards for self-directed support. They reference the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It would be neat to, and I think one next step for this work will be to offer this to the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities for consideration and inclusion, as best practice standards. So here's the preamble. We all have the right to live a life of freedom and full community inclusion. These fundamental rights were articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The 2006 Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities underscored that human rights apply to all people regardless of the challenges they face. To ensure human rights for all, we must organize self-directed supports that maximize choice and control. A few things here. The human rights framing is very intentional. And we had a lot of discussion actually back and forth in the group about whether you'll notice, the word disability only appears one time referencing the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Idea being that this statement applies to anyone who needs some additional support. Right? So not limiting to disability or calling out disability in any particular way, but keeping it as universal as possible. So then we said the following, what do you think? I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. There we go. So then we came up with 15 essential elements. I'll walk you through them quickly, and then would like to hear what you think. So when we're talking about a system of self-directed supports, what are we talking about? These were crafted, mind you, to apply to any government. We tried to keep them in language that was as simple and translatable as possible. Again, no small feat. These are draft. These were literally well, they're not finalized yet, but the group met on the 20th, last week, to discuss. So these are very much still in draft form. But if we're talking about self-direction, what are we talking about? What are the best practice elements? And I haven't met many self-direction programs that include all 15 of these elements, by the way. They are aspirational. So the first is dedicated resources, so a budget of some kind that's individualized and that is used, that is controlled by a person or their chosen representative or representatives. And it's used flexibly and creatively to support that person's best life. Second key essential element, access to legally recognized supported decision-making that minimizes substitute decision-making and the loss of legal agency. So again, here's that link to the supported decision-making match. Third, outreach and education about self-direction, self-directed supports beginning in early childhood. Fourth, clear and simple information, widely available in the mainstream. Australia has been really good at this, I think, with their National Disability Insurance Scheme, really making self-direction something that's just sort of universally known. And there were investments in public information about it that were needed for this. Tailored for cultural responsiveness and relevance. Again, getting this issue of equity and access. These are materials that are for communities to understand and recognize that this is something that they can tap into, that they can access, that it's a right. Fully accessible. Practical, budgeting and administrative processes that minimize participant burden. This thing isn't so Byzantine and complex that you have to have a law degree in order to take advantage of it. Sixth element, person-centered planning. I talked about the importance of that. Seventh element, assistance with the technical aspects of self-directed support. So for those of you in the U.S., that would be information and assistance or support brokerage services. Unfortunately, in a lot of programs, if you want that kind of support, you have to use your budget to sort of hire somebody. We believe that best practice is that support kind of goes along with the package. And if you're self-directing, then you are entitled to support to self-direct, and it shouldn't be something that you have to, have to opt into or pay for yourself. If you need the support, you should be able to access the support. We don't make people pay for support navigating a traditionally funded system. Why do we make people pay for navigating a self-directed system? An eighth element is peer support. And so that is specifically referring to mutual aid, understanding and navigating the system. That occurs at the person level, at the community level, and the systems level. And the idea that peer support. So in mental health self-direction, a best practice is that certified peer specialists, so paid peer supporters, make really good support brokers. And that may be true for other populations and groups as well. And I think it's really exciting to think about a world where in self-direction, people with disabilities have jobs, if they want to, as support brokers, helping other people navigate self-direction, having been through it themselves. A ninth principle is resource allocation, so determining how much that budget should be. It should be transparent, that process. It should be fair, and it should be based on what the person wants and needs. 10th, this one was tricky. We're still working with it. Portability of self-directed funding and eligibility within jurisdictions, across jurisdictions. It used to be across jurisdictions, and then somebody was like, does that mean that if you move from New Zealand to the U.S., your funding comes with you? Because that's never going to happen. So still discussing that. But even in Canada or in the U.S., if you're self-directing in one province or territory or state and you move to another, I can't speak for Canada, actually. Maybe somebody can. In the U.S., that's a no-go. And so that means that people who are self-directing in the United States don't have the option to move if they want to continue with the services that they have and that they like. So last 5. Comprehensive and genuinely independent systems of advocacy that protect human rights, privacy. So this is independent advocacy that really ensures that self-direction actually contains these robust elements. 12th, and these are kind of the system level ones, go towards the end. 12th is practices so basically people can choose their choices. So self-direction is not, we're not contending that all home and community-based services, all long-term services and supports should be self-directed. Everything should be individualized with the budget controlled by the person. Not everyone wants that. Or some people only want to self-direct one part of their services, and they're very happy receiving, other services from a traditional provider, or they don't want services at all. They get what they need in other ways. a robust self-direction system is, people can kind of titrate their involvement and their level of choice based on their personal circumstances and what they want. A 13th element is around quality and outcomes measurement and really ensuring using data that self-direction is working and doing what it's intended to do. A 14th is around an orientation to, and this is another one that I think we need to strengthen, towards sort of ensuring equity, respecting, honoring, responding to different cultural identities, and knowing that work will look different depending on the populations that we're ensuring, because of historic marginalization and underrepresentation of indigenous communities of color, of folks who don't use words to communicate, and on and on. So, really attending to the need for equity across self-direction work. There's finally, kind of more research and attention being paid to these issues. It's long overdue, and we have a lot to learn, particularly when you think about communities and cultures where this like highly individualized focus doesn't necessarily resonate. So what does self-direction, what does choice and control look like? And how might that look different and resonate different for people from different cultures and backgrounds? And finally, but certainly not least important, people with lived experience can and must be involved in every level of self-direction, not just, the end user having a stronger voice, not just good advisory committees, not just paid peer support, but really the people making the rules, and the people enforcing the rules, and crafting the policies, need to have lived experience and be informed and allied with people with lived experience all along the way for this really to have legs and to continue to be a responsive model that promotes and lives up to its values. So that's what we have. Let me see if I can share. I did write down just a few uncertainties thinking that they might be interesting to you. I think I already noted them all. Oh, no, I didn't note one. So I talked about how I think we have a little more work to do to craft something that really works in terms of honoring and responding to culture, these ongoing issues of portability. And then finally, initially, we, in addition to a human rights frame, we used a citizenship frame. And this is something that it would be interesting to hear from y'all about. We took it out because the word citizenship in some countries and communities, including in our current political environment in the United States, connotes some sort of legality that is not vibing with the need for equity and inclusivity that we see as essential. Thinking about citizenship as everyone living a life as a full member of the community is what we mean. And yet, we heard from leaders in indigenous groups in the New Zealand group. We heard from folks in the U.S. that maybe that word is not the most choice word, and heard from other folks of, well, I hope that we can keep it because at heart it means something really powerful around individual fullness of life in the community and sovereignty. That is pretty important. So it's not in the statement right now, and we're not sure about whether to keep it in or not. So yeah, I'm curious to get your reactions.